At the foundation of all of this is energy. You know, you mentioned ADIA and you mentioned the sovereign wealth funds. You know, we can look back 100 years and see a trading, you know, a merchant and trading society. We can see a pearl market. We can see an incredible growth over the last decades. I'd like to ask Justin specifically on energy. What's the outlook in terms of not only the macro picture, but I think you've also been looking specifically at, there seems to be a thought that natural gas is moving ahead in terms of the long-term future pipeline of energy resources. Talk a little bit about energy and how that plays into what we've heard here from the other panels.
Okay, well, first of all, Stuart, I'd like to thank you for having me here, and I appreciate the opportunity to address the audience. Now, in terms of Dubai and the greater Gulf, I just recently spent the last 6 months in the Gulf, and so I had an opportunity to see things up close, and then as well as view it against my overall experience in the Gulf in terms of my academic research and so on. Now, when we think about the Gulf and the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, we see this region as being, of course, a primary energy exporting region. So we always tend to view, when I say we, I mean the West in general, Europe and the US, as what this region holds for the West in terms of energy exports, although we don't tend to view this region as being a region which suffers from energy imbalances or shortages, which is, of course, what is happening currently in the Gulf, although not with oil, it's happening with natural gas. And this is a direct outgrowth of the Gulf, the rapid rise in industrialization and economic growth that occurred roughly from about 2001 into 2008, which is what I term the second oil price revolution. The first oil price revolution, of course, being 1973 to 1974, when the oil price, international price of oil, of course, quadrupled. So from 2001 to 2008, extremely high economic growth in the Gulf, principally due to the impact of the increase of the international price of oil. Although it wasn't a sharp uptick in the price of oil, of course, this was an incremental rise that occurred after 2001, of course, which came in the wake of the Asian financial crisis in 1997, 1998, when the international price of oil dropped significantly. So with this, the Gulf countries viewed natural gas as being the pillar of their economic growth. So as a result, what they did was they directed this natural gas towards domestic industrialization for extremely low prices. So initially they were able to do that because the natural gas in the Gulf is produced alongside of oil. But what occurred was several ramifications happened that resulted from this policy. One of the principal ramifications was that, yes, there was major industrialization. We look at industrialization, we see rapid growth in terms of the downstream value-added industries such as the petrochemical sector, steel sector, aluminum smelting, and so on, which there is significant growth that is occurring in this region. So no longer can we really view the region as merely being a primary product exporting region. They are now starting to export manufactured products, which I think is quite essential. And we tended to view that this is just something which would be confined to the West, although this is increasingly occurring in the Gulf. But another thing that occurred was not merely the industrialization, but also if we look at the retail sector for electricity growth, there was this idea that the social contract basically included the governmental promise that energy will be supplied at low cost or no cost to the populace. So as a result, we see extremely high growth rates, demand rates actually, for energy usage, with the populace, of course, considering that energy is their birthright and that they should be able to use energy as they want. But one of the consequences of that, of course, is a type of artificial demand, a type of bubble that has occurred with that. And we see that recently, about 2007, 2008, where you see the more extreme points of the economic growth in the Gulf, we start to see the natural gas and energy shortages, which are rippling across the Gulf, which are impacting nearly every single country with the exception of Qatar. Okay, so when I say every single country, every single GCC country, with the exception of Qatar, which has extensive natural gas reserves along the lines of 900 trillion cubic feet of gas reserves estimated. So we see that natural gas is directly impacting the Gulf's ability to industrialize. And when I say industrialize from the top down. So this is primarily, as has been stated earlier, the government's view that it should give a slight push towards development, economic growth by financing certain projects and also by trying to inculcate technology transfer and also FDI within several of the downstream value-added industries. So in 2007, 2008, before the financial crisis, international financial crisis really became apparent, we see that many of the Gulf countries were lacking the natural gas to be able to fuel their industrialization in order for power, which is electricity generation, and also in terms of their downstream value-added industries, petrochemicals, aluminum smelting, steel, cement, and so on and so forth. So what has occurred is that many of the Gulf countries, the leadership, they're looking at how to overcome this energy shortage that is occurring now. And this is very important. So when we see many of these projects in the Gulf, such as the Mustar Initiative, when we see the Gcc Nuclear Plan, which was announced in 2006, whereby every GCC country has committed to constructing nuclear power plants. Of course, the UAE is the farthest in terms of that, but all the rest of the countries are trying to get into the nuclear power generation as well. We see that this is a direct outgrowth of the fact that there is an energy shortage in the Gulf in terms of natural gas, and the countries are attempting to overcome this fundamental imbalance, which will impact the economies in many ways, which are unforeseen and uncertain now. But I mean, some ways are extremely certain in the sense that, one, for Saudi Arabia, for instance, it does have a natural gas crisis, and it could impact, for instance, within the next several years, the ability of Saudi Arabia's oil exports. Okay, and this is a very important issue because Saudi Arabia is using oil, crude oil, and also fuel oil for its domestic power generation needs in lieu of natural gas, simply because it hasn't found enough natural gas. So this is an issue. Now it's not so important because OPEC made certain quota announcements in order to deal with the impact or the weakening of the international oil demand. So now it's not so much of an issue, but when the international economy does come back to growth, when the growth patterns return it will happen eventually within the next several years, then this will be a very significant issue. Within the UAE, in terms of FDI, foreign direct investment within many of the industrial sectors in the UAE, how is the UAE going to encourage FDI if many of the foreign companies, the international companies, view that on one hand, the UAE is not able to provide guarantees, not necessarily sovereign guarantees for, let's say, certain investments, but in the sense that it will simply be able to deliver power, electricity, natural gas to the sectors in which it formerly did. This is a significant issue for foreign companies that want to redirect their investment to the Gulf region, to the UAE in particular. So I just want to give a basic overview of some of the more, let's say, granular issues that are impacting the Gulf, impacting economic development in the Gulf, and basically to add another context as how the Gulf countries are going through their own energy crisis as well. It's not merely a Western issue or not merely an American or European issue where the region is just merely viewed as being an energy exporter. They will have to get a hold of and they will have to attempt to overcome their own energy crisis in order to remain a quite vigorous region in terms of economic growth.
Thank you, Justin. That's fascinating. I think there's some old adages about the blessing and the curse of oil in terms of the economy of countries in the region and over time managing dependency on one source and one resource. And you've pointed out that what we popularly perceive as an unlimited spigot of energy in the Gulf is in fact dependent on a whole lot of other things as well.